The Sahel wind never forgets. It whispers through dry grasses and across riverbeds, trailing behind cattle hooves and the feet of travelers who have walked for centuries, never staying, never truly leaving. If you listen closely, you may hear the echo of flutes, the lowing of sacred cattle, the murmur of ancient names spoken in Fulfulde. You may hear the Fulani, scattered across more than 20 African countries, from Senegal to Sudan, from Mali to Cameroon. The Fulani or Fuli are one of Africa's most widespread and complex peoples. Over 40 million strong, they have no single homeland, no capital, no fixed center. And yet they are bound together by something far stronger than borders: memory, movement, and mystery. Who are the Fulani? Where did they come from? To some, they are nomads from the north, descendants of Berbers who rode with the desert wind. To others, they are people of the Nile, carrying the blood of ancient pastoralists from East Africa. Still others say they are rooted in West Africa, born from the soil of the Sahel itself, children of the Kaawu and the sky. Their story is vast, threaded through empires, migrations, and myths, each version shaped not only by history but by the storyteller. This video is not here to provide a single answer. It is here to follow the question. Through oral tales and historical texts, across rivers, deserts, and dreams, we will trace the journey of a people who do not ask where do we live, and how do we move, a people who carry their identity not on maps, but in code, in cattle, in song, in silence, in dignity. This is the story of the Fulani, a story that does not begin in one place, because it was always moving. The origin of the Fulani has long puzzled historians, linguists, and elders alike. Their presence is ancient, their path elusive, like hoofprints washed away by rain. But through memory, legend, and science, patterns begin to emerge, a constellation of clues scattered across Africa's vast map. One theory traces them to North Africa. It suggests that the Fulani descended from Berber or pre-Berber peoples who migrated south, blending with sub-Saharan populations as they moved into the Sahel. The reddish tones in some Fulani complexions, their tall statures, and certain facial features have led scholars to wonder were they once desert wanderers, pushed south by climate or conquest. Another theory reaches toward the Nile, connecting the Fulani to Nilotic or East African roots. This idea draws from the way Fulani pastoral culture mirrors those of ancient Nile societies, the sacredness of cattle, the practice of ritual scarification, and the presence of strong oral genealogies that resemble those of East Africa's nomadic clans. And then there is the theory, bold, compelling, that the Fulani are indigenous to West Africa, that they emerged from the great convergence of peoples in the Fata-Jalan highlands of present-day Guinea or the ancient kingdoms along the Senegal River. Here, their language Fulfulde took root, their cattle moved with the seasons, and their identity evolved not as invaders, but as integrators, blending with the Mande, the Wolof, the Songhai, and beyond. Linguistic evidence offers its own tale. Fulfulde, the language of the Fulani, is part of the Niger-Congo family, spoken in dozens of dialects, but always recognizably Fulani, and yet it carries whispers of Afro-Asiatic influences, as if somewhere, long ago, desert winds braided with river tongues. But perhaps the most important evidence lies not in books or bones, but in stories. Fulani oral tradition speaks of ancestral migrations guided by the stars and the behavior of cattle. Cattle that refused to drink from poisoned rivers, cattle that led their people away from danger, across borders not yet drawn. The Fulani did not follow maps. They followed signs of rain, of grass, of balance. Their migration was not a single journey. It was a pattern repeated over generations, a rhythm west to east, east to west, like the pull of memory returning to its source. And wherever they went, they adapted, not by becoming like others, but by remaining themselves. Not conquerors, but carriers of a culture older than the line between stillness and motion. To understand the Fulani, you must understand their first ancestor, not in the sense of a date or dynasty, but in the rhythm of a story, a tale passed in murmurs under starry skies, beside flickering fires, and in the footsteps of cattle across 1,000 miles of grass. One story tells of Kaawu, a semi-mythic ancestor born under a full moon beside a silent river. He was said to have been raised not by people, but by cattle, and he spoke their language. He wandered with them through the savannas, learning the signs of the rain and the secrets of the wind. When he reached adulthood, he returned to humanity, not to rule, but to lead, not to conquer, but to guide his people by the wisdom of the herd. In Fulani cosmology, the cow is not just an animal, it is origin, it is purity, it is the first companion, the first mirror. Children are taught from infancy to respect cattle, to walk among them, to speak to them gently, to know them individually. A Fulani herder might know his cows not by markings alone, but by personality, by the sound of their breath. In many Fulani traditions, the cow is the compass. The family moves not by map, but by the rhythm of grazing, the cycles of water. A cow's refusal to drink from a certain stream might mean it is spiritually contaminated. If a herd turns away from a direction, the people follow. Cattle are also seen as spiritual currency used in bride price, in offerings and burial rites. To give a cow is to offer a piece of the self. To lose one is to mourn more than property. And in this bond, a deep spiritual ethic was born. The cow teaches patience, balance, and silence. It does not rush, it remembers, it moves in rhythm with the earth. In this way, the Fulani believe their culture was shaped not just by ancestors in human form, but by the quiet wisdom of animals who watched them grow. This sacred connection lives on today in nomads who still wake with the cattle at dawn, who sing to them in the soft whistles of Lavol, and who walk the trails their ancestors once followed, guided by hooves and horizon. Across the vast stretches of Africa, the Fulani are everywhere, and yet nowhere fixed. They are one of the most widely dispersed peoples on the continent, stretching across more than 20 nations. From the rivers of Senegal to the savannas of Nigeria, from the highlands of Cameroon to the deserts of Chad, the Fulani presence flows like a current, unbound by geography, yet unmistakably rooted in identity. But this identity is not singular. It is a constellation of cultures, dialects, and expressions. There is no single Fulani way. Instead, there are branches, each bearing the same root, yet flowering in unique forms. There are the Borororn, the pastoral nomads known for their vibrant dress, facial markings, and fierce independence. Their lives revolve around cattle movement and the open sky. Then there are the Fuel Gobi, settled agriculturalists who raise crops and maintain local authority in villages. In Guinea, the Fuel Futa are scholars and spiritual leaders, keepers of Islamic knowledge and poetic tradition. And the Wodabi, flamboyant and proud, are famous for their beauty contests and ceremonial dances where men line their teeth with ash and stretch their eyes wide to charm women. During the Gerewol, language ties them together. The Fulani speak Fulfilled, also known as Pular or Pula, depending on the region. It is a language of tone, of grace, of coded meanings. Though its dialects vary, its essence holds firm. To speak Fulful Day is not just to communicate, it is to participate in Fulani heritage. What binds these variations together is more than blood. It is a moral and spiritual code. Pulaaku, this is the heart of Fulani identity, a set of values that define how one should act, even when no one is watching. Modesty semtienda, patience manual, respect for others sagatotari, courage dimor, and the refusal to bring shame upon one's people. Pulaaku is what makes a Fulani, noble not wealth, not conquest, not fame. A poor herder can be a master of Pulaaku. Amaganamia perapori, a wealthy man who breaks its rules is considered lost. It governs how you speak, how you walk, how you carry silence, how you face adversity. It is a living compass passed from parent to child, from elder to youth. So as the Fulani moved, they carried this compass not only in their speech, but in their posture, in their restraint, in their pride. Whether dancing under desert stars or praying in quiet mosques, trading in markets or roaming with cattle, they remained Fulani, shaped by land adapted by time, but always walking in rhythm with something older than empire, older than memory. Long before flags of empires rose over the Sahel, the Fulani carried books, they carried prayers, and they carried the Quran, sometimes tucked into leather amulets worn on their chests, other times memorized and recited beneath the whispering trees. For the Fulani, Islam was not just a religion. It was a path that merged perfectly with their own moral code, Pulaaku. It offered not control, but clarity, a discipline that harmonized with the ethics already coursing through their way of life. By the 11th and 12th centuries, Islam had already spread across West Africa through trade, scholarship, and diplomacy. The Fulani embraced it early, not only as believers, but as scholars, teachers, and spiritual leaders. They built Dara Islamic schools in rural regions where nomads rested. They became guardians of literacy in Arabic and students of law, theology, and philosophy. But by the 18th and 19th centuries, a new chapter in Fulani history began, one of fire, reform, and revolution. Across the Sahel, Fulani scholars began to speak out against local rulers they believed had strayed from true Islamic values. These were not cries for power. They were calls for purification, and from these calls, jihad movements were born. The most famous among them was Usman Dan Fodio, a Fulani scholar, poet, and teacher who in the early 1800s led one of the largest Islamic reform movements in African history. From the city of Zoto in present-day Nigeria, he launched a jihad that swept across Hausa lands, toppling corrupt rulers and founding the Sokoto Caliphate, a theocratic empire that spanned modern-day Nigeria, Niger, and Cameroon. Usman Dan Fodio's legacy is complex. He was both spiritual leader and political strategist, warrior, and sage. His caliphate became a beacon of Islamic learning, attracting scholars from across the continent. And yet, it was also a conquest, reshaping political structures and redefining Fulani identity as both religious and imperial. But the Fulani Jihads were not limited to Sokoto, in Fouta Djallon, Guinea, Fouta Toro, Senegal, and Messina, Mali. Fulani-led Islamic states rose and ruled, sometimes justly, sometimes harshly, but always with the vision of returning society to divine order. Islam had become inseparable from Fulani identity, not as an imposed dogma, but as a shared moral force. The prayer mat laid beneath the stars, the Quran memorized while herding cattle, the mosque and the market and the moving tent, all bound by belief. This fusion of faith and nomadism, of cattle and caliphate, transformed the Fulani from wanderers to rulers, from pastoralists to scribes of law. And yet, even as empires rose and fell, the core remained, a quiet strength, shaped by discipline and dignity, carried across the desert by men who knew the value of silence and the power of the word. To the Fulani, movement is not chaos, it is art. It is rhythm, it is ancestry and motion. Their nomadism is ancient yet intentional, not drifting but guided, not fleeing, but remembering every step along their routes through savannah, bush, or riverbank is a step walked by generations. The Fulani do not move to escape, they move to remain Fulani. Among the most celebrated of the nomadic Fulani are the Borodu, known for their striking appearance and almost mythic elegance. Their camps are minimalist but ordered. Their posture is tall, dignified. Their clothing vibrant, often adorned with beads, amulets, and cowrie shells. Beauty is not vanity. It is a way of honoring the self, the ancestors, and the journey. And nowhere is this more vividly expressed than in the Gerewol festival of the Wodabi, a subgroup of the Fulani. Once a year, young men gather and prepare, painting their faces with red ochre, whitening their teeth, elongating their eyes with dark colds, and dressing in feathers and beads. Then they dance, they sing, they flirt. The dance is not only for spectacle, it is a contest of charm, of grace, of endurance. Women watch closely, choosing the most elegant, the most mesmerizing, the one whose beauty carries ancestral blessing. The men sing in high-pitched harmonies, eyes wide and smiles radiant, performing under the scorching sun as if it were moonlight. This celebration of beauty is not superficial. It reflects deeper values, the ability to endure, to remain joyful through hardship, to carry tradition not only in voice, but in body. Nomadism, too, is beauty, the sight of a line of Fulani herders walking through, grass taller than themselves, their cattle trailing behind like a slow, moving river of memory. Camps are set by streams known only to the elders. Children are taught to read the wind, to sense rain in the silence, to know the taste of grasses their herds prefer. This lifestyle may appear fragile in the face of modernity, but in its elegance lies resilience. In its restraint, a hidden wisdom. The Fulani do not build monuments. They do not raise empires of stone. Their monument is the journey, their empire the open sky, the loyal herd, and the story carried in song. For centuries, the Fulani moved freely, following cycles older than borders, older than maps. But then came the lines, the Western lines, drawn by rulers in Europe who had never walked the Sahel, never tasted the dust of the Harmattan wind. These borders did not see the Fulani, they saw territory. And in doing so, they cut across ancestral paths like blades through cloth. Under French and British rule, Fulani leadership was restructured or dismantled. Emirs were appointed not by councils of elders or spiritual merit, but by foreign administrators. Traditional roots were disrupted, the cattle tax was introduced. Sedentarization, the forced settling of nomads, became policy. What had once been a way of life was now called a problem. The very traits that made Fulani society fluid, mobility, autonomy, oral knowledge, were now seen as threats to administration. Yet the Fulani adapted. Some became bureaucrats and teachers. Others entered modern militaries. Still others retreated deeper into the bush, preserving their rhythm out of view. But the challenges did not end with independence. Today, Fulani herders face new forms of restriction, expanding farms, shrinking pastures, and escalating conflicts with settled communities have brought tension and tragedy. Climate change has dried old rivers. Political violence in the Sahel has turned Fulani identity into a label too often used with fear rather than understanding. Media headlines reduce them to a stereotype: nomads, militants, victims, perpetrators. But the real Fulani story, their spiritual richness, their historical complexity, their moral code is rarely told, and still they endure. Herds still move under the stars, songs still rise with the cattle's breath, elders still whisper maps not drawn on paper, but remembered in footsteps, because the Fulani know the ground may change, but the journey continues. The Fulani identity today is as wide as the continent and just as layered. There is no single image that defines them, no singular language, no fixed costume or code, and yet there is something unmistakable. Something quietly powerful that binds a herder in Niger to a professor in Dhaka, a market woman in Abuja to a poet in Bamako. They are fuel. In cities, Fulani intellectuals write books and publish newspapers in Pula and Fulfulde, keeping the language alive through syllables once only sung. In universities, they teach history, not the history written about them, but the one carried in. Oral tradition, in lineage and rhythm. In the arts, Fulani musicians fuse traditional flute and drum with modern sound, creating new expressions of ancient voice. But even as many Fulani become urbanized, traders, politicians, engineers, artists, the values of Pulaaku remain: modesty, restraint, patience, inner dignity. These are not old customs to be discarded. They are the spine of identity. They are spoken not in slogans, but in silence, and how one walks, how one listens, how one forgives. There is also a quiet revival underway. Young Fulani across West Africa are returning to their roots, learning Fulfulde, relearning their lineages, asking elders to teach them the proverbs and histories once passed from knee to ear. In Guinea, Mauritania, Mali, and Nigeria, cultural festivals have returned, not only for tourists, but for the community itself, a space to remember, reconnect, reclaim. Even in diaspora, far from the Sahel winds, Fulani families keep the flame. They pour tea in 3 rounds, bitter, better, best. They name their children after ancestors who moved not by roads, but by stars. They keep cattle in memory, if not in fields, because Fulani identity is not only in the herd, it is in the heart, in the code. In the quiet commitment to live with honor wherever the path may lead. Long after empires crumble, long after flags change and borders blur, the wind still moves across the sail, soft, unyielding, ancient. It carries with it the scent of cattle, the dust of footsteps, and the songs of people who remember, people who do not plant flags in the soil, but footprints in the grass. People who do not measure power by land owned, but by dignity preserved. The Fulani or Fulani or Fool are not defined by one place, one time, or one history. They are defined by continuity, by the ability to move without losing self, to adapt without breaking, to carry their ancestors not behind them, but within them. They are scholars and herders, poets and warriors, nomads and neighbors. They are a people of silence and song, of memory and motion, and though they have been misunderstood, they have never been still. Though they have been displaced, they have never been lost. Their story does not ask for pity, it asks for respect. It asks for listening to the whispers of cattle bells, the hush of ancient language, and the call of a flute carried on desert wind, because the Fulani did not come from one place. They come from everywhere they've been.